Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again. I am Katie Batesman, the content director at She Can Code, and today we are discussing the importance of diversity for digital transformation. Digital transformation has helped level the playing field, so to speak. Parents can now apply for more flexible or remote roles, and opportunities have been opened up to people who would have never previously been able to reach them. But in order for digital transformation to succeed, there is a need for a diverse range of thoughts. Luckily, today I'm joined by the wonderful Mia Ellis, Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Mendix, who is here to delve into the importance of diversity for digital transformation. Welcome, Mia. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Kaylee. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your Friday to come and have a chat with us. Can we kick a bit of background about yourself, please?
Sure. So I have been in the area of DEI for the last almost 14 years, and I've worked across several industries. So I started out in higher education and worked in different universities here in the States. And then I worked in healthcare, I've worked in retail, and now I've landed in tech. So as you can imagine, multiple different industries are trying to use more of an inclusive lens as they're developing their strategies and products, recruiting talent into their organizations. So that's essentially what I do. And I am, as I mentioned, located here in the US. I live in sunny, sometimes Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And yeah, I love the work that I do. And I am definitely a research minded approach practitioner, I would say, in how I go about implementing different strategies. So it's definitely cultural awareness and human behavior combined with organization development and change management.
Amazing. And I do never know. I never know what people are going to say on this podcast. But I love the fact that you came through so many different sectors to get to tech as well, because some ladies I speak on here, they took a direct route, they did computer science, came straight into the tech industry. That's fantastic. But sometimes, most of the time on here, I hear that ladies come from one industry into a completely different industry through to the tech sector. So you went from higher education, care, retail, tech. Wait, did you take something from all of those, I suppose, and that kind of led you into the tech industry? Did you bring together all those different skills that kind of ultimately ended up in working in the tech sector?
I did. I feel as if working with adults primarily. So in higher education, I was working with adults who had more barriers than most to higher ed. And so I was kind of drawn into the DEI realm that way and realized that doing the so faculty members and people who are working within, organizations, really there had to be a bridge between people who are looking to come into that environment and people who are already in that environment. And that, I think I've taken that to every single industry, is really being a bridge between the community and talent, as well as, and being an advocate for them. And then also in coaching and guiding leaders in organizations to understand the talent that they're bringing into the organization and how to help them thrive. So I've been able to pick up all of these things, I think, looking at things from a retail perspective or from a health perspective, or from higher education. There's inequities in all of these different industries. So I think that it's really broadened my scope. And I think it's really helped from working on the corporate end, being able to give them some insight from the higher education end, and saying, these are some things that you should keep in mind when you're looking at resumes from certain institutions and things like that, and how you can keep an open mind and removing bias through these types of processes. So yes, let's say overall summary, yes, I think it's really helped me to bring a very well-rounded view into the industry of DEI.
Yes, definitely. And we love that on this podcast, the range of roles that are available in technology and just all the different routes that people take to get in. And it is always a misconception. You have to have a computer science degree and come straight into tech, and that's the only thing you can do in tech is to be very technical, and that's it. And there are just a range of roles, obviously, in the sector. Which is why we love to have a range of different guests on here, and including yourself, as to just to showcase all the different jobs Fantastic. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about digital transformation. Can we kick off? Can you give a brief overview of what digital transformation is?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when most people hear the term digital transformation, their mind tends to think to the technology side, of course. And I like to say that I am the human side of digital transformation. And so culture plays a very, very critical part in a successful digital transformation. And when organizations are able to recognize that there are certain complex problems that we are facing now as organizations in the digital era, they can't all be solved by technology. You need human ingenuity. And so they're taking more proactive steps to create this culture within their organization that allows digital transformation to thrive. So when organizations are taking those steps, are taking a look at the attributes of digitally mature organizations, they're prioritizing diversity and building processes and behavior expectations that allow for innovation and diversity of thought. That is where I think most organizations who have been successful in digital transformation have prioritized. So it's not just the technology piece, but also how they're preparing their leaders. Are they fostering an environment where people feel comfortable to share their ideas and to get creative? And do you have the diverse makeup within your employee set and your teams to help that happen?
Yes, I love that. I love the fact that you described your job as the human side of digital transformation, because you're right, it is so important. As we said right at the start of this as well, there are so many jobs out there that are not the technical side. And in tech, everybody jumps, even with digital transformation, as you said, right to the technical side of things. But obviously, digital transformation can't work without the human side, as you said, creating the right culture, preparing your leaders. It's incredibly important. I love the way you describe that as your job, though, because some people, I heard that tip at a networking event years ago of how you describe your job is so important. Instead of walking up to somebody and just saying your job title, it's better to describe, actually what you do, and actually saying I'm the human side of digital transformation is a perfect example there. That's it's not your job title, but everybody would think, oh, I see, I completely get what you do just by the way that you described it there. How do you think the diversity ties into digital transformation?
Yes. So and I'll draw on some really great research that Dr. Linda Hill from the Harvard Business School had recently put out. And she talked about these, as I alluded to before, these complex issues, and specifically three main ones I'll mention here. And how diversity really plays into these. So the first one would be higher expectations from customers. So customers have much higher expectation for a unique, tailored user experience. So it's not enough just to have a great product. Customers want to know, who I am, and you've curated this experience for me. And so that requires human ingenuity. That requires understanding, especially on a global scale, how different customers think, who they are, how their identity plays into it. And so diversity is needed in that regard, right? So you have to have a diverse group of people to say, well, this might land a little bit different than this group or this customer base. And then the next would be your employees. So the talent that you're bringing into your organization have a lot higher expectations as well. So they're looking for more inclusive work environments, leaders who have higher levels of relational intelligence and what I call human skills, and being able to cultivate psychologically safe environments. And they also want more meaningful work. They want to know that the work that they're doing is doing something, is changing something for the better. And so in order to anticipate the needs of the talents that you're trying to pull from, especially diverse groups of talent, it's important to know those things and to have a better understanding of how that shifts based off of identities, whether it's age, gender, race, nationality. And so diversity and understanding those aspects is very important there as well. And then the last would be our stakeholders. So they have very high expectations for us as well as our organization. They want to know, what are you giving back? How is what you're building solving social problems? How are you really giving back to the communities that you operate in beyond just making money as a company? And so those are also, I would say, the three main things that are cannot be solved by technology alone. You need to have a more nuanced, human-centric focus when tackling those type of complex problems. And so diversity plays a role into all of those things, in understanding people and being able to anticipate and meet those expectations.
Yes. I mean, so I wanted to ask you what the benefits of a diverse workforce, but actually the way you broke that down there, you talked about customers, employees, stakeholders, all of them are equally important in having that diverse workforce. You mentioned there about, even if a diverse workforce would say, actually, this might not land so well with customers, you're going to have that embarrassing PR moment, aren't you? And there are several brands that have done it, and you just think, why didn't you just have a little diversity of thought on your team, and that PR accident just wouldn't have happened,
Yes. Yes, exactly. I would say this all the time, that when you're putting out, communication or a product, the last thing you want to do, especially when you're thinking that it's going to meet the needs of a certain audience, is to have it land flat because you haven't had the perspectives that were necessary in the development of it to give you that lens, and to say, hey, this might be a better approach to do this. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of that benefits, that breaking that down into three, diversity really affects all of them. As you said, we talked there a little bit about that PR and the customer experience and being part of a diverse team, even through to the stakeholders. There are benefits all round really for diversity, isn't there? It's pretty much a no-brainer.
Yes. So there has been countless research that exists out there that show diverse teams just outperform more homogenous teams. They just do. Their McKinsey report, Deloitte, Gartner have all come out with recent studies on this, and you just end up with better business outcomes. You have better performance, because people are able to be creative and innovate and hear different perspectives to build these really great nuanced services. And then you have employees who have a higher intent to stay. They want to stay in that environment. Who wouldn't, when they feel that who they are is welcomed and included in their perspectives and ideas. So overall, diversity, when you really do prioritize that in your organization, it meets and checks all the boxes that you're trying to achieve.
Yes, definitely. And so there are some thoughts that diversity is needed for digital transformation to succeed. What are your thoughts on this? We spoke a little bit there about it's kind of a no-brainer to move forward with diversity. Is it necessary for digital transformation to be successful?
I would agree with that sentiment. I would. I think it would be very challenging to continue to try to drive digital transformation without placing diversity as a core component. Not only as we talked about, diverse perspectives are looking at problems in a more comprehensive way, and you're able to anticipate a broader range of global needs, which is important for a company to have. But you're also able to look at your processes within your organization, your strategies, the communications that you put out, and all of that is necessary, as well as your leadership style, how you're training your leaders and leading diverse teams. It's a skill set that you really need to have as a leader today, especially from a global perspective. So you have some leaders that, like on my team, we're distributed. You have some people in Germany, some in the Netherlands, some in the States. So really having that understanding and lens is very important to have as a leader as well.
Yes, definitely. I love the fact you talked about there building it into leadership styles. It is something that we spoke about on this podcast quite a bit, that you can't, it has to trickle down from the top as well. It has to be built into everything that leaders do throughout the whole DNA of the business. for it to work. So I completely agree with you there. And I mean, in terms of we spoke a little bit about this already, but digital transformation can help level the playing field. But how do we make sure that it's put into place if we agree that we think it's necessary and it can help level that playing field? How do we put it in place?
Yeah, so I think this is another kind of multi-step approach, and it starts with leadership, of course, as we talked about. When you think about most people, when they talk about their experience at work, leaders are really driving that culture, right, for their employees and their teams. And so it does start with leadership training and making sure that your leaders understand that being able to lead diverse teams, it's a skill set that they have to build and acquire. And so it's really having them understand that collaborating with their teams is going to look different than maybe what it did in the past. So leaders are going to need to have the ability to facilitate diverse discussions with peoples and perspectives and bring that all together. It's recognizing I don't have all the answers in the room, and I've selected people with diverse areas of expertise that can co-create with me, rather than I have to have all the answers, I have to lead everything. And so it's different. It's a different approach, and so that's something that we have to ensure that our leaders understand. The other thing is really just kind of committing to looking at our policies and how our organizations carry out certain actions, whether it's recruitment, product development, customer care. You're analyzing each area of these business. So my role is yes, it's housed in people and culture, but there is a lens on every single area and department of the business that I coordinate and collaborate with as well, which I think is also very important. I would say the other thing too is making sure that there are specific funds and resources that can available to foster the environment for digital transformation to thrive. It's very important to make sure that your employees are supported, they're not burning themselves out, that they have an environment where they can, I like to say, fail safely. So normalizing
Yes.
experimentation and making mistakes and knowing that they can, take risks on things, and then setting clear goals, being very transparent about what you're trying to achieve and how you want to measure it to make sure that you can adapt and shift when necessary. So all of these things are important in ensuring that you can move towards digital transformation successfully and move through it, I guess I would say. And so you have your leadership, you have your processes, you have, your team dynamics, you have making sure your goals are clear, set, clearly communicated. All of those work together, I think, in tandem.
I love that. I love everything you just said, especially about an environment to fail, which is so important. But also, you talked about a way to measure what you're doing as well, and what you're achieving, and how to move forward from that. There are so many companies that forget that part, and I think a lot of companies they tick that box on, they think they're doing something with diversity, or they might partner with somebody just so they can put a badge on their website, and that's it, and they don't actually measure what they're doing and whether or not it's working for their workforce, and how they're actually moving forward. So important to just check back at what you're doing and if you're making progress. And I want to ask you a little bit, why do companies undergoing a digital transformation need diversity, which we have covered a little bit already, but I suppose it's just kind of what I'm thinking is a lot of companies, they still think that diversity is one of those nice to haves. It's not always part of the day to day. But what we spoke about on here already, already in our conversation, is that diversity should be at the forefront, especially at the forefront of digital transformation, not kind of an afterthought. Is that something you would agree with?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that companies that understand that knowing how to operate within a diverse space, how to lead, how to be able to leverage skills in a diverse audience, how to apply diverse perspectives to a strategy, all of those things that we, like you said, talked about are a necessity. And I know that the organizations, at least from Dr. Linda Hill's research, her study that she conducted, and it wasn't just in the States, it was across 90 countries. So this is something that multiple global companies have recognized and realized and have really started to place an emphasis on. So I don't think that it's going to go anywhere. I think that most people will eventually start to realize that it is a necessary component to have.
Definitely. And I mean, hopefully, and the more that companies realize that, and the more that people do it and show the benefits and the results that they got from that, the more that will continue to follow. And you are right, there is some great research out there now that, and you mentioned McKinsey, they had a great report about, just showing the results of what these companies have been doing. I remember McKinsey brought a report out which said about profit increase, and suddenly it was like a lot of companies, their ears pricked up. It's not a nice to have, it actually increases your bottom line as well. Right. And thankfully there is more and more research that can show that now, to help support companies who are looking to improve diversity in their workforce. I mean, as we said on here repeatedly, obviously it is a no-brainer, but what can organizations do to ensure that they're getting a diverse range of voices within their transformation?
Yeah, so I think shifting to the recruitment part of the talent, this is another multifaceted, nuanced approach that I would suggest in this regard. It's not as easy as just posting a job and thinking that everybody is going to come.
Yeah.
I always I use the term of farming or cultivating, as opposed to hunting, when you're trying to look for this talent, right? So you want to make sure that, number one, you're restructuring the hiring process to prioritize identifying and finding diverse talent. So you're looking at your talent pool and saying, how can we broaden this? How can we partner with different organizations, universities, different conferences, make sure we have attendances there to be able to connect and build relationships with these groups. And I say build relationships intentionally because it is a long time process. You have some organizations that, when they're really focused on bringing in diversity, but it's kind of, we go one time, set up a table, recruit, and then we're gone, as opposed to this long-term relationship that really cultivates a trusting environment where they see you as an employee of choice, that they know will, maybe that looks like donating your time or doing some job shadowing or doing some mentorship opportunities, where you're constantly staying in contact with these groups and these communities so that trust builds over time. And you want to do that because these groups of people, they know when they're being targeted to be drawn in for diversity. They're very savvy. They know this, and they want to ensure that they're going to an organization that has a very strong, clear strategy to help them thrive and advance. So they're going to ask those questions. They're going to want to know, they're going to have very targeted questions about representation and what are you doing within your organization to prioritize this. And you want to set up your hiring managers and your recruiters to be able to answer those questions as best as possible, and making sure that they feel safe and going through your process, your recruitment process, as much as possible, and that you're mitigating bias throughout so that their experience is very pleasant and positive. And even if they don't choose to come to your organization, they might come back at a later time, or they might recommend it to someone else. That's essentially where you want to get to when you're looking at bringing more diversity into your organization. So talent is much more savvy. They're going to be looking out for certain things. And so making sure that you have a professional within your organization to help guide you, I think, is also important. On restructuring your processes is, I would say, a big priority. So all of those things would be my recommendation in that regard when you're starting to look to bring more diversity into your organization.
Yes, definitely. Definitely is not as you said, turn up, do one thing, put up one table, recruit and leave. I completely agree with that. You are right. Some companies they think it just happens overnight. And a lot of the companies that we work with at She Can Code, they have a long-term strategy. We're a small part of that long-term strategy. And you're right, it's partnering with lots of different organizations. It's being present at conferences, or having leadership team that speaks on the subject. And you are right, it's so many different avenues, not just a quick table set up, recruit and gone.
Yeah.
And I agree with as well, even if somebody doesn't join your company at that point in time, they might join in the future, if your strategy is a long-term one. So I couldn't agree more with you on all of the different things that a company needs to do. We've seen a number of calls for workers to return to the office. Do you see this as a long-term strategy, or will companies lose out on great talent?
Yeah, I think this is honestly, Kaylee, I think this is a very polarized topic for a lot of people. And I know that it really depends on the person individually, that employee, whether going into the office benefits them or not. Since we're talking through a D&I lens, I will say that there are people who have marginalized identities that when things went remote or in hybrid, they did take a bit of a breath, and it was like a relief for them, because they didn't have to necessarily deal with microaggressions or kind of put on a mask that they were okay. And so they did take a little bit of a breath, and keeping that in mind. On the other hand, there were other people who really struggled without being in the office and around people, and it impacted their mental health very deeply, and they wanted to be in the office. And then there are other people who were like, hey, I prefer my own space. Maybe I'm neurodiverse, and I don't really like the noise or whatever it might be. So there's so many different layers of why people may or may not, and because of that, I would suggest that whatever an organization, whatever decision they decide, is to make sure that you're bringing your people along with you. Ask your employees why they may or may not have a certain preference. Bringing them along with that decision, whether it's hybrid or coming back in, is so important, because people don't want to feel like they are not in control of something that's impacting them very deeply, and it might impact them in a way that you might not know or anticipate. So having very, very clear communication. As I said, I have my master's degree is in change management, and one of those principles is making sure that you are bringing along people with the change that you're implementing, right? You want to be very clear in communicating, and you don't want people to feel like something's happening to them. You want them to feel like they're a part of it and their thoughts were taken into account. Otherwise, you're going to have this really strong resistance if people feel that that kind of choice or their decisions weren't really incorporated in the decision that was made. So whatever you are doing or whatever you decide as a company, just make sure you're taking your employees along with you and asking them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because you sit there and instead of somebody just feel like something is just sort of happening to them and there's no control over that. And I love the fact that you mentioned neurodiversity and all of the different things actually that feed into why somebody would prefer to still work from home or do a hybrid mix of home and the office. I think sometimes that always goes straight to parents and childcare, but actually I love the fact that you mentioned lots of other different reasons there as to why somebody would still want to be hybrid, at least, because you're right, it's talking to the employee and each employee and the differences that they have in their needs, because I think you are right, you could lose a lot of good talent along the way if you're kind of just pushing people in a direction that they didn't want to go. And if you've done all that work to try and find a diverse workforce and then you do something to make them all leave,
right,
it's not a good plan.
Right.
We are nearly out of time, so I have one last question for you. I could talk to you for another hour, but I have one last question. What do you think is next for diversity and digital transformation?
Yes, that is a really great question. And I kind of alluded to this before, but I do see it going and growing. I think a lot of more organizations, they are recognizing it. So here, as someone who's based in the States, conversations around DEI have been happening for some time. And, I'm starting to see now that it's becoming more global. And so places and parts of the world that I never saw DEI roles popping up before are now happening. And I do think it is because those barriers are coming down, and organizations and industries are becoming more global and realizing, hey, like we just need to have better understanding of people. How do we understand them? How do we communicate better? How do we anticipate needs better? And so I think that we will continue to see this upward trend of diversity being aligned with digital transformation. And currently, I'll add this, I'm in my doctorate program and at the dissertation stage, and that's what I'm going to be writing my dissertation on as well. So
Gosh.
really excited to see how this continues to change and evolve over time. But yes, that's what I would think, is that this is not a concept that's going to be going away. I think it's just going to become more and more prominent, and more implemented within strategies of global organizations.
Yes, I agree. I am pleased that it's not going away, because I think during the pandemic, it was something that I think those of us that work in that area were thinking, oh, is that something that now we're going to take a step back from that? Was that nice to have suddenly going to disappear? We kind of got over the hurdle of the nice to have, and now, the pandemic hit. What's going to get hit first? Is it going to be diversity? But luckily that didn't happen, and you're right, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So
yeah.
Well,
as long as we have people in organizations, we're going to need it.
it's exactly, I completely agree. And now I don't think we have to struggle with that argument much anymore. That evidence is there. And you're right, as long as there are people, and that in good companies listen to their people is the other thing. And talent knows, when you mentioned earlier that talent is very savvy, it is. And talent knows when they're at a good company that actually listens to them, and they jump ship, obviously, if they feel they're at the wrong place.
Right.
There was a brilliant survey, a report recently. Actually, I've seen a couple on the same subject recently about young people and what they look for when they join a job now. And more, I keep seeing that the younger generations are not looking at salary, they're looking at culture, diversity. It's suddenly a priority, thankfully, for younger generations. So if your company doesn't reflect that, then you're not going to bring in the good talent.
Exactly. Absolutely right. I would agree.
Well, we are already out of time here. I could talk to you for another hour or so this afternoon on this topic, but it has flown by. So thank you so much, Mia. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
And to everybody listening, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.